All right, so in this video, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and cover everything else that's left. Just put it all in one video. So this is going to be about 3 different presentations all in one. So just know it breaks up into different ones, and I'll tell you where that break is, just so you can keep track of everything. So this first part, we're going over Canadian history, government, and economics, and also a little bit about culture. All right, so first off, Beringia, we've gone over this tons of times. That's, of course, a land bridge that connected from Russia over to Alaska, where natives a long time ago, like 10,000 years ago, crossed over and then walked throughout the Americas. And then when you get to European exploration, the French showed up for the fur trade, took over especially Quebec, as where French-speaking Canada is. Then the English pretty much took the rest of the continent, of course, down here originally, but then spread out west after that. All right, and then Canada, for most of its history, after being taken over by the British, was a dominion. And what this means is basically it was a confederation. So that means that their government, they had a strong local government, but they were still under control of the British Empire. So their government in Ottawa could take care of domestic affairs in Canada, but they couldn't go into like foreign treaties or declare war on another country or something like that. During this time, the 1800s, early 1900s, we see the growth of the railroads spurred on by the gold rush. Gold rush was mainly in the western part of the country, so a lot of people moved there during that time. Before that, before the gold rush, most of the people that moved to Canada were people from the United States that were loyalists to the crown during the Revolution, and after the Americans separated from the British, a lot of them moved to Canada to stay with the British. So why settle near the U.S. border? About 95% of all Canadians live within 100 miles of the United States, and there's 3 main reasons. You need to know these 3. Definitely be questions about this, and it's all common sense. I mean, first one's climate. It's obviously going to be warmer near the border. Secondly, land's way more productive, again, because it's warmer. And then transportation is available in this area. Railroads, roads, things like that. It's hard to build any of that in the upper part of Canada, up in here, because this is all permafrost, and it's hard to construct much of anything on ground that is permafrost. All right, Canada's government really quickly. All right, so they have what's called a parliamentary system. So it's similar to ours. It's a democracy. Parliament is similar to our Congress. You can see the setup over here. The couple differences. One, the Queen of England is still the figurehead of Canada, but she has no power whatsoever. She's just there on paper, basically. And then you have the Senate and House of Commons. So this is how Parliament is separated. So a lot like our Congress, Senate being the upper house, lower house. House of Commons is like the House of Representatives. So this is the legislative branch. They also have an executive branch where the Prime Minister and his cabinet, just like our president and cabinet. And then the judicial branch, they have their own Supreme Court system. So 3 branches just like us as well. The difference is how they elect their Prime Minister. So with us, we all vote for president directly. Whereas in Canada, what they do is they vote for a political party to try to win the majority of seats in Senate and House of Commons. And so let's just say the Republicans and Democrats. So if they're trying to get the Republicans to win majority, if the Republicans get majority of seats in House of Commons and Senate and therefore control Parliament, then the leader of the Republicans, the leader of the party, automatically becomes Prime Minister. So going into vote in Canada, you're not going to see on the ballot, who do you want for Prime Minister? You're going to see who do you want in the Senate and who do you want in the House of Commons. And you know who the leader of the party is, so you know who it is that will become Prime Minister if your party wins. The area where this works well is the fact that whoever the Prime Minister is the same political party as the majority rule in Parliament, which means things are going to move quicker. Things will get passed a lot easier. The negative, though, is that this doesn't force them to compromise as much as what you see in our system, where you may, like this past 4 years, you've had a Republican-controlled Congress, but a Democrat for a president, and so that it's supposed to force them to compromise and work together. All right, economy and culture. The GDP of Canada, most of it comes from mining, fishing, farming, and timber, so a lot of gathering natural resources for the most part. Biggest export is fish, like salmon, and then about 60% are in the service industry. So especially when you move west, especially like the prairie provinces and stuff like that, you're going to see a lot of farming and timber, especially up in the northwest, you'll see a lot of timber. Mining in the Rockies, fishing on the east coast and some on the west as well. So a lot of primary and some secondary activities as well. And then, of course, 60% in tertiary. All right, and then their culture. So Canadian culture is a little different than ours in the sense that as Americans, no matter what culture we come from, we all live together intermixed. Whereas in Canada, they tend to stay separate, and they live in different parts of Canada, more separate from each other. So you got the English part of Canada, which is most everywhere except Quebec, the French part, which is Quebec, and then the Inuits, the natives, mainly live up north in Nunavut, and then the Métis is a mixture of Inuit and French or English, makes them. So they're like the fourth culture. So they can be kind of separate. They may, lean more towards Inuit. They may lean more towards European culture. You really could go either way with them. And then your First Nations peoples, that's what the Canadians refer to as the Inuits. So these people are usually bilingual, may even be trilingual. So usually they have a native language they speak. An indigenous language is the word we use for that. And then they may speak French or English or both as well, which of course would make them trilingual. Climate, of course, where they live is very cold. Transportation, this is here just pointing to the fact that they built the railroads. So they were employed to build them a lot like what we did here in the U.S., and they were put on reservations in Canada just like what the U.S. did with Native Americans here. So treated very similarly between the two countries. The Nunavut, this is the newest territory, far northern Canada. It's the largest territory. And this was given mainly to the Inuits. It was created in 1999. Mainly for them. And just so you know the difference between a territory and a province, a territory just has a very small population, so it's not enough to make it a province. So it's just different as far as how it's run. All right, now we're switching gears. So switching into terrorism. So with terrorism is the unlawful use of or threatened use of force or violence against individuals or property for the purpose of causing fear, and that's the key part. And so that's why you see politicians all the time talking about how we don't need to give in to the fear and let that control us and dictate the kind of policies we create in combating terrorism, because that is the point. They want to see us cowering in fear and not doing things we would normally do. So the goal of terrorism isn't necessarily to kill a lot of people, it's to hit symbolic targets like the World Trade Center. And yes, this did kill a good amount, but the point is this is a huge symbolic target. So, hitting something like the Golden Gate Bridge in California or Sears Tower in Chicago, which is called Willis Tower now, but things like that most Americans know, it may cause a lot of damage and may kill a good amount of people, but the main thing they're going after is the fear they want to cause. All right, now the main group, there's a lot of different terrorist groups. There's Al-Qaeda, which we're mentioning here because they're the main ones that led 9/11, but there's also the Taliban, there's Hamas, there's Hezbollah, there's Boko Haram, there's ISIS, and there's tons of other groups out there as well. But Al-Qaeda is one of the most well-organized terrorist organizations. I would say more so that ISIS is a little scarier maybe, but Al-Qaeda is much better organized and definitely more global than ISIS. And I mean, I can pretty much guarantee you there's Al-Qaeda cells in the United States as we speak. So they are worldwide. They were started by Osama bin Laden in the 70s. Today, the current leader, because we killed Osama bin Laden, the current leader is Ayman al-Zawahiri. He started out late 70s. He started his own terrorist organization. He assassinated the president of Egypt back in 1980, Anwar Sadat, when he made a peace treaty with Israel. And then, of course, after Osama bin Laden was killed, then he took over. And that's him down there, this photo here. So anyways, Al-Qaeda, they at first were focused on the Soviets. So they fought the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 1980s. And we actually funded Al-Qaeda. So we gave Al-Qaeda millions of dollars and weapons to fight the Russians. And of course, Russia lost, Soviet Union disappears, and after that, starting in the 90s, we become the main target of Al-Qaeda. So it starts with the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. They had several bombings in embassies throughout the world, U.S. embassies around the world. And then they also hit a naval ship in 1999 over in Yemen. And then, of course, the World Trade Center in 2001. As far as why, well, first off, the main thing is they oppose our influence throughout the world, and especially in the Middle East. But overall, their goal is to create an Islamic state that controls the entire world. And so the idea is that they'll create a utopia, a perfect civilization, by conquering the world and ruling it with the perfect religion. So that's their idea and their goal. And so in response to 9/11, we created the Office of Homeland Security, which is to help control our borders. So that's why we get more security at airports and then border control and then shipping. So a lot of things changed pre-9/11 to post-9/11. Of course, you don't realize that because you weren't alive then, but there's a lot of differences between the two. All right, and of course, now we watch a video about this in class. Finding the Roots of 9/11. If you missed class when we talked about terrorism or watch that video, you do need to watch that. You can find it on Amazon Prime, but you should be able to find it on YouTube. If you just type in Finding the Roots of 9/11 by Thomas Friedman, it should pop up. With that, you need to take note of what the 3 rivers of rage were, and that's obviously an analogy for the 3 main underlying causes of 9/11. So take note of what he says those rivers of rage are, and then you need to write a response and basically answer the question, which river was the most powerful force leading to 9/11? So if you missed class, you need to do that. Watch that video. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. So again, it's Finding the Roots of 9/11 by Thomas Friedman. And you'll need to write down what are the 3 rivers of rage that he mentions as being the underlying causes of 9/11. And then after the end of the video, and cite information from the video, so I know you watched it, what river do you think is the most powerful cause of 9/11 going into it? All right, so now we're going to transition, next presentation, social geography in the United States and Canada. So it's getting into culture. All right, so first off, Canada is seen as a cultural mosaic. You need to know what this analogy means. So if you think of mosaic, it's several different pieces that aren't connected together, but when you back away from the picture or whatever it is, you'll see basically one cohesive image come together. But when you look at it up close, it just looks like different random pieces. So Canada is like that. You get the First Nations people, the French, the English, the Chinese, and they're all separate from each other, living separate from each other, not intermixing. But to get an idea of what Canada is as a culture, as a whole, you have to back away and see all of them together and how they fit together as a whole and make up what Canada really is. So that's how their culture pretty much is, which means there's not really a Canadianness. Like, there's not one cohesive Canadian culture. Their history isn't exactly exciting, and so there's not a lot really bringing them together cohesively. Whereas in the United States, has always been seen as more of a melting pot, which is the idea that people come here and they assimilate. Now, especially early immigrants, early 1900s, when they came here, would start speaking English immediately. A lot of times would stop speaking their own language and would assimilate to American culture as quickly as possible. Now, some people say that we're more like a salad bowl today, which if you think of a salad, like a mix of vegetables and stuff like that, like you have all these different things together, like tomatoes and croutons and cucumbers and lettuce, obviously, and stuff like that. And it's all mixed together, all living together in the same area, but it doesn't meld together. The tomato doesn't become a crouton. The tomato holds on to its tomato-ness. The crouton holds on to the fact that it's a crouton. So yes, they live together, but they're retaining their culture and who they are as well. And so the U.S. has kind of transitioned more into that over the past few years. All right, and then look at human diffusion, immigration, and where people live. So immigration, we've talked about push and pull factors before. So again, push factors is what cause people to move away from a place, and pull factors is what draws them to a new location. And so this can be within countries themselves and stuff like that. This isn't just moving from one country to another. A few things about immigration. So as far as immigrants go, immigrants, they pay U.S. taxes, but they receive fewer public services in return for those taxes. And so this is another reason this could encourage illegal immigration, because it's like if you're illegal, you can get the same public services for the most part, and you're not paying taxes. Then so in the 90s, of course, we see a big boost in immigrants coming into this country, the biggest since the early 1900s, but it shifted where they were coming from. So before early 1900s, late 1800s is mainly from Europe. Of course, 90s moving forward to today, it's mainly Hispanics. So people from Latin America, as well as Spain, moving into the United States. So illegal immigration, of course, this isn't just a U.S. problem. We see this in many other countries around the world. Of course, one of the biggest things is the fact that this encourages employers in the U.S. to hire people for really cheap labor and kind of mess them over with that. And also, too, a lot of this money goes back into Mexico instead of staying here in the U.S. economy. Now, it's factors that cause illegal immigration, war, so like the and crime up there too. But so like what's been happening in Mexico with the drug cartels. Family reunification, again, I use Mexico as an example. A lot of times the men come here and work and the families stay home in Mexico. So obviously they want to bring them up here with them. Extreme poverty, again, like we see in Mexico. Drugs, like we see in Mexico. slavery, prostitution, death, things like that that are happening. Prostitution, for example, in Russia. If you're a girl that doesn't have parents, so you're an orphan, when you turn 16, if you don't have a family to be with and stuff like that, a lot of times you're put into human trafficking and you're sold on the streets forcefully. So there's reason to want to get out of there. All right, so here you see immigrants and where they've come from. Also see an influx coming in from Asia as well. And we still see illegal immigrants coming in from not just Latin America. There's also some from India that come here. And this graph just shows different regions and countries where immigrants have come from throughout the years. So again, like I said before, late 1800s, early 1900s, mainly European countries is where people were coming from. And then really since the 60s and on, you start seeing Latin America and Asia take over as your main locations. Now, as far as English-only laws, now I mentioned before, the United States does not have an official language. So English is not the official language of the United States. We don't have one. But some states have instituted English-only laws. And all this means is that these states will only print out government materials in one language. Here in Texas, we do too. We do English and Spanish. Everything's printed out from the government. But technically, you can't force someone to speak English because it's not even the official language of our country. All right, and then population by race and ethnicity, breaking down, seeing the shift that's going to happen. So in 1996, 73% of the country was white, 12% black, 11% Hispanic, and Asian/others like Native American made up 4%. By 2050, it's expected to change like this. So about 53% will be white, 24% Hispanic, 14% black, and Asian and other will be 9%. Now keep in mind too, we're starting to see a lot more interracial marriage as well. So we're starting to see a lot of mixture of those because like my kids are everything on this pie chart except Asian. Well, they are other though because they're part Native American. So technically they're everything on this chart. So we're going to start seeing more of that as well where you get a mixture of races altogether in one person. Now as far as where different populations live, Hispanic populations mainly in the south along the border. Which makes sense because that's where most Hispanics are coming across from Latin America, so they tend to stay in the south, southwest. And then African Americans tend to live more in the southeast, so basically from where we are over to the east coast and then up into Virginia. You'll notice it's the same area where slavery was as well, and you'll see some pockets in the north where in the early 1800s a lot of African Americans would flee to escape slavery, but still populations mainly centered where they were brought here back during the slave trade. And then Asians and Pacific Islanders more so on the west coast because again it's closer to Asia, but you see pockets throughout the country like here in DFW. A lot of this is because of the universities we have here and work available and stuff like that. So you see pockets throughout, but more so on the west coast. And then Native Americans, highest areas is your reservation, so eastern half of Oklahoma, the Four Corners region, the Dakotas, Montana, and then, of course, Alaska. Now, keep in mind, there's not that many people there, so that's like 5 people in that region. All right, last presentation. So that was social geography. Now we're getting into urban sprawl. And this is a big topic, so make sure you know what urban sprawl is and understand what we're talking about here and the problems of it. So this is population density in the United States. In the year 2000, so as we've seen before, it's mainly on the eastern half of the U.S. is where the densest population, then again in San Francisco area, then L.A. So urban sprawl is poorly planned urban growth. This is where a city is growing so fast that it's not able to keep up with the amount of people coming in and doesn't plan accordingly. And so you see a lot more suburbs growing. And the problem with a lot of suburbs, like our area, is the perfect example of urban sprawl. We have 7 million people in this area, and we're spread out over 4 counties with tons of suburban areas. And so this means a lot more infrastructure, all the highways and roads that we have to take care of. We take up a lot of space, and this costs a lot of money. It's way more expensive to maintain this urban area than it is New York City. New York City is compact. That's the way it needs to be. And so this happens when car-dependent areas move into agricultural areas, which again is exactly what's happening in the DFW area. It's hard to get around here with public transportation because everything's so spread out. So we're totally dependent upon cars, and so it creates a lot more pollution, a lot more traffic, and then of course affects the agricultural areas, takes away places where we could be farming. And so these are just examples of neighborhoods that are planned out and how some of them can really take up too much space. Like this one here You have a lot of roads that don't keep going. And then, of course, you have a lot of open space where you could have had houses here. Definitely better traffic flow. But of course, now you're using a lot of land for roads and not as much for houses. To actually see an actual image you see here. So it's kind of depressing. But like this one is actually a pretty good one. So the idea is to have everything as close to the housing as possible. So here you have like a supermarket in the middle. I assume there's a school right in here as well. So basically, you can do most of your life here in the circle. You can live in the circle, go to school in the circle, go to the grocery store in the circle, probably go to the bank in the circle, maybe even throw a church in there, go to church in the circle. Like everything can happen in that circle, which is depressing. And here's another image again, just urban sprawl. So everything's all spread out. And then here, there's a lot of wasted space. And so especially when you get to higher income homes like these here, they want bigger lots, and so you give them that, but it just takes up all this extra space. Whereas imagine how much easier it would be to build one apartment building, and when I say apartment, like nicer high rises, build one high rise. All these people could easily live in one high rise, no problem, and you could compact that a lot more so. Same thing with all this out here. You could just build one or two high rises and probably put all of these people into that one area. Here, of course, land dictates a lot, but especially when you have this little amount of land, this is a dumb way to use it. Again, high rises would be able to put all these people into one or two high rises and save a lot of space by doing that. All right, answers to urban sprawl. First one's smart growth, and this is just efficient use and conservation of land as much as possible. So Portland is an example. So they circle themselves kind of like that circle I showed you. So they make sure that everything is within walking distance for the most part, so you don't have to go from one part of the city to another to get anything done. Portland also has an amazing public transportation system. They're also the cleanest city in America. It's a very well-run city. Vancouver's another amazing city for that, where they create sustainable communities. I know some cities like that even have like rooftop gardens and stuff to where they actually get food from within the city. Then the Woodlands in Houston is another example. So the same thing, like instead of being a suburb of Houston and everybody going into Houston to work, they've attracted businesses to the Woodlands. And the way they built the city is they incorporated it into the forest. So instead of just clearing all the trees out, they incorporate the city into the forest and conserve as much land as they can. Hence why it's called the Woodlands, because it looks like it's just in the middle of the forest. You don't just see city everywhere. But again, the main thing is that you work, you eat, and you shop, and you live life all in the same area without having to go from one place to another. All right, environmental issues that we see in the U.S. and Canada. So hazardous waste. Yeah, there's a lot. I don't want to read all this. But we produce 80% of all liquid hazardous waste. In the air, yeah. So I'm trying to think just how to summarize this. Hold on. And you got undefined hazardous waste. This is things like from your oven, drain, toilet, window cleaners, weed killers. People pour gasoline out in the yard sometimes from their lawnmower, fertilizers. But the U.S. produces 5 times more hazardous waste than the EU, and we have a comparable population. They're a little larger, but 5 times the amount, and a lot of that is because of the extra space we use, because of urban sprawl and things of that sort. And then, of course, everything that we build, and with urban sprawl, it gets into animal habitats and starts taking them over. So that's why here in this area, we're starting to see a lot of coyotes come into urban areas, bobcats, even mountain lions. I've seen some mountain lion in Louisville one time when I was golfing. But we're starting to see these animals encroaching on urban areas because we've gone into their territory. And they have less territory to roam in. Same thing with deer, too. All right, and then this is looking where acid rain is. Acid rain mainly occurs up here, and this is when chemicals that get into the atmosphere, when it rains, it catches those chemicals and brings them back down. And this breaks down roads, bridges, things like that a lot quicker. And of course, it's not healthy at all. Then air problems. So we make up 5% of the world's population, but we produce 26% of the greenhouse gases. So those are the gases that trap solar energy, basically, near the Earth's surface and make the Earth a little warmer. And then we get more smog, and so this is where stuff from industry and cars mix together. So during the summer, if you ever look outside and on a hot day and you kind of see this yellow tint in the sky, especially as you look towards the horizon, that's smog. It's just the nastiness from all the pollution. And then thermal inversion. So this is where you got a warm land air is trapped by cooler air, usually in a city, in a valley, or low area. So LA will have thermal inversion where down the valley, all that air gets trapped and there's all that smog, and then it makes it really warm and nasty in there. And then acid rain, as I mentioned, can kill trees, destroy fish, wildlife, damage surface of buildings and statues. So it costs more to maintain things, and of course it can kill animal life. Water problems. So freshwater, of course, acid rain can hurt that. Farmland, we irrigate that. We use aquifers to do that. So in Texas, we have two main aquifers: the Agualala Aquifer in the Great Plains over by Amarillo and Lubbock, then the Edwards Aquifers over in the Austin-San Antonio area. And they're being depleted very quickly, especially Agualala Aquifer, because it doesn't rain that much out west. But there's a lot of farming, and so they're tapping into that aquifer, and it's running dry. Same thing with Edwards as well. As a lot of people are moving to the Austin-San Antonio area, and so it's putting a lot of demand on that aquifer to provide water for them. I don't really need to go into that. And then after this, it just gets some political cartoons, which I'm not going to go over right now. So that's it for the United States and Canada. So, of course, you got your quiz coming up. Just remember, this is the first quiz you're going to have where you have to know all the states and U.S. or Canadian provinces and territories. So make sure you study for that. Use TAP Quiz or lizardpoint.com to do that.